Ludwig Fleck Prize. It is awarded annually for the best book in the area of science and technology studies by the Forests. The Ludwig Fleck Prize is named after the microbiologist Ludwig Fleck, 1896 to 1961. Author of the genesis and development of a scientific fact. Fleck states history of the discovery of the Wassermann reaction to syphilis. It was originally published in German in 1935 and then republished in English in 1979, after having been cited by Thomas Kuhn as an important influence on his own conception of the history of science. Both Fleck's history of discovery and the history of his book's rediscovery exemplify a view of progress that continues to inform research in science and technology studies fields. Presenting the award, Steve, would you come up here? Presenting the award is Professor Stephen Zaire of the University of Southern Indiana and the Forest Secretary. And Professor Zaire will introduce his committee members.
Thank you, Gary. The Fleck Committee received over 100 nominations for this award. We narrowed that list down to numerous very strong books, and after deliberation came to agreement about a winner. On behalf of the fellow Fleck Prize committee members, Linda Lane and Laurel Smith-Dorr, I have the pleasure of awarding the 2014 Fleck Prize to Helen Tilley for her book, Africa as a Living Laboratory, Empire, Development, and the Problem of Scientific Knowledge, 1870 to 1950. Dr. Tilley is associate professor of history at Northwestern University in Chicago, USA. The book addresses the occasional dissonant interactions between European imperialism and the role of environmental, medical, racial, and anthropological scientific expertise in the colonization of British Africa. It is a book with great breadth and depth. It broadly covers colonial projects across different African contexts and longitudinally over a time span of 1870 to 1950. And yet with that breadth, the book also provides deep analysis of the processes of the construction of scientific knowledge in service of British attempts to modernize, including how those attempts were often unexpectedly subverted by scientists' concerns with local knowledge. In that sense, the book challenges a more homogeneous understanding of the work of science in service to imperialism in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The book is empirically rich, firmly grounded in existing literature, and an interesting read. Unfortunately, Dr. Tilley is unable to be here to accept the award, but has asked her colleague, Dr. Stephen Epstein, a past Fleck Prize winner himself, to accept the award on her behalf.
Buenos tardes. It's an honor to accept this award on behalf of my Northwestern University colleague, Helen Tilley. Helen has chosen, for reasons of her own, not to send her visual presence, but has sent her text, which I will read. So these are her words. Let me begin by saying how sorry I am that I can't be with you during this historic gathering and how grateful I feel to the Forest Committee for this signal honor. I have always been cursed with a penchant for thinking big and from the top down, so I tried to turn these qualities to my advantage in my first book. Of course, that meant I took almost a decade to figure out all of the intersecting parts of my story, but the intellectual payoff still feels worth it. The questions at the heart of Africa as a Living Laboratory have to do with my desire to understand some of the epistemological dynamics of empire building. What did it mean for an entire continent to become simultaneously a laboratory for colonial control and scientific study? Which disciplines were involved and what were their benchmark questions and ideas? How did concerns about economic development dovetail with scientific debates? And in what ways did understandings of science change as British practitioners engaged more actively with Africans' ideas and practices? Now you might see what I mean about my curse. Big questions, indeed. And in fact, far from being just a scholarly project, most of these questions arose out of work I did in the 1990s with social and environmental justice groups active in what's now called the Global South. The book is actually full of surprises, at least to me. I argue, for instance, that those producing new scientific knowledge in British Africa began to undermine a range of popular ideas that circulated during the scramble for Africa. Ironically, this new research often challenged assumptions about Europeans' racial superiority, about Africans' technological backwardness, and even about the continent's abundant fertility. In their quest to modernize colonial territories, British officials were repeatedly forced to contend with the results of scientific studies that destabilized the very foundations of their imperial projects. My findings in this first book foreshadowed the questions I'm taking up now about how and why empires in Africa came to an end, and what effects decolonization had on state and Pan-African research priorities. The beauty of our line of work is that we get to ask questions that matter to us. When we excavate the past, we never quite know what we'll find, and I love that. I also love that STS has begun to excavate its own global roots, so that we now understand more clearly how different places and peoples have mattered to the production of knowledge. I feel blessed to have been able to learn from so many scholars in African, imperial, and science studies who have been thinking about these questions over the years. I would be remiss if I didn't pay tribute to Nancy Steppen, one of my earliest supervisors and a trailblazer in science studies in Latin America, and to Steve Fireman and Megan Vaughn, whose research redefined so many different debates about knowledge and therapeutics in African studies. To those at this meeting helping to coordinate the exciting new STS Africa network, I only wish I could join you. And to my several friends at this gathering, here's to having a virtual toast and a happy dance across the oceans. Thank you very much, says Helen Tilley.